Hi, my name's Bridget. Last year, for the first time in my life, I joined a political party. I joined Labour. Because I want hope. And for me, Jeremy Corbyn means hope. Hope that the politics and people in this country can change for the better. Get back on track. To be in a place that I can be proud of. Where people care about each other and their environment. But I want to tell you a little bit about myself first, so you can see where I'm coming from. I'm 68. I was born in 1947 in Lancashire. I grew up in a poor single-parent household with my mum, my grandma and my brother, but with an extended family that lived nearby. We were poor, but I look back on my childhood with fondness. I belonged to a gang who would play out all the time, sledging in winter, collecting wood for bonfire night, and sometimes doing silly dangerous things, but that was all part of growing up. I was in the pantomimes at the local Methodist church, and later I became the singer for a local pop group. When I was 15, I left school and went to work in the local paper mill, and later a textile firm. I knew I fancied girls and I didn't want to get married, so it seemed the only way out for me was to join the forces. So I joined the Women's Royal Air Force in 1965 and served for 6 years. I had a great time. I mixed with people from very different backgrounds to me. And I went to places that I would never have been, at least not back then. Of course, there was a downside. I was lesbian, although I didn't call myself that then. And I survived the infamous witch hunts, where people suspected of being gay were interrogated, and if proven to be homosexual, they were thrown out. I can tell you it wasn't a very nice experience. When I was demobbed in 1971, I went on a TOPS shorthand typing course in London, and I became a secretary. At the same time, I was coming to terms with my sexuality and began my first long-term relationship. Then in 1974, I had the chance to go to college to acquire the equivalent of A-levels. I'd always wanted to further my education, and I was awarded a grant from my local council. I went to Hillcroft College in Surbiton. That was a college for mature women, and it's a sister college to the one in Oxford called Ruskin. This opportunity changed my life forever, and I will always be grateful. From Hillcroft, I went to Queen Mary College, London University, where I got a 2:1 degree in classical studies. Again, I got a grant, and I would not have attended either college or university without that support. I began to study for a doctorate with the idea of becoming a lecturer. But I got to know many of the undergraduates, and I discovered that most of them came from privileged backgrounds. I realised that this was not what I wanted. I wanted to be able to use my education to help other people from similar backgrounds to me. So I left university and I went back up north to look after my mum. And with yet another grant, I acquired a postgraduate diploma in youth and community work at Manchester Polytechnic. I got a job working for Lancashire County Council as a rural youth worker. But as a result of coming out at my first staff conference, I was discriminated against. Having applied for promotions several times and being unsuccessful, I discovered the reason. It was because I was lesbian. I was told in no uncertain terms when I applied for a girls' work post that, as a lesbian, I could not work with girls. I left. I moved to Leicester, and I set up with my then partner Lesbian Information Service. I jointly ran this for 12 years, supporting hundreds of isolated lesbians around the country. Then in 1999, after conducting research into the needs of lesbian, gay and bisexual young people, I set up an LGB and later T youth group in Calderdale, which I helped to run until we had to close in 2011, due mainly to funding problems. Despite having retired, I continue in a small way to challenge homophobia. Next year, I will be celebrating 30 years of supporting LGBT people, and in particular, young people. In October this year, that's 2016, we're having a reunion of the Gallic graduates, young people who accessed our services over the 12 years it existed. It's going to be great to catch up and see what everybody's doing now. We only ever once lost a young person, a young lesbian, and that was very much in the early days. She died of a heroin overdose. I tell her story on YouTube. It's called Julie's Story, and it shows just how far services need to go to be able to meet the needs of young LGBT people, and that's quite a long way. I'm passionate about challenging homophobia and helping to change society so that LGBT young people are no longer one of the most vulnerable groups in our society. It's through my work that I began to realise that fighting one oppression isn't enough. We need to fight all oppression. Most of the young people I've worked with come from similar backgrounds to me. Poor, lower class. Many are disabled, in particular with mental health problems caused through homophobia. Some have come from black and minority ethnic communities with the added stress of racism and or cultural homophobia. I am a woman, I am a lesbian, and I come from a poor, lower class background. All of these things have affected my life. But if I'm honest, the one that sticks out most, the one I have experienced most discrimination about, is my sexual orientation. Which is why I've devoted so much of my life to challenging it. But it is the combined effects of institutionalised classism, homophobia, sexism, and now ageism that keeps the issues I face hidden. Very few of the young people I've worked with come from middle class backgrounds. And once their initial coming out was dealt with and their families came to accept them, their problems usually became minor in comparison to those young people from poor, lower-class backgrounds. Which brings me back to where we are now and why I joined Labour and support Jeremy Corbyn. Most of my life I voted Liberal or Lib Dem because, frankly, they have the best policies for LGBT people. It took Labour and the unions a long time to catch up. But we're only just starting. I want young people from similar backgrounds to me to be able to go to college and university and get a grant, like I did. I don't want fracking. I support all of Jeremy's 10-point manifesto, but the one I am most interested in is equality. This is where I have most to offer. Jeremy's equality policy must not be divide and rule, giving preference to one issue over another. This just feeds into the status quo. It is important that we understand where oppression comes from, how it is perpetuated, and then we know how best to tackle it. Institutional oppression works along similar lines against all minority and oppressed groups. We already know how it works, and there's been some progress, but not enough to stop young people, in particular young LGBT people, killing themselves. The 6 main institutions that create and perpetuate oppression are religion, law, medicine, media, education, and the family. A comprehensive strategy must be developed to tackle all of these institutions. A strategy that gives equal importance to all oppressed and minority groups, including poor lower-class people, including black and minority ethnic people, including lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people, including disabled people, old people, young people, women, and other groups such as immigrants, travellers, those with mental health problems, and so on. Such a strategy will take on board multi-oppression, that's intersectionality, which results in those who belong to several oppressed groups being highly vulnerable. The system that discriminates against some groups works for the advantage of privileged groups, i.e. middle class, white, heterosexual, non-disabled, not old or young, men, etc. And I'm not trying to guilt trip anybody. Just thank your lucky stars that if you belong to these groups, try your best to empathise with those who don't. That system must work for the advantage of everybody, leaving nobody behind, least of all the most vulnerable. After all, it's the system as it stands that makes them vulnerable in the first place. So go for it, Jeremy. You have my backing. But please make sure this opportunity includes everybody. Thank you.